Hello there, my name's Damian. I've always thought that too many guys are afraid of spending time in the kitchen, but I also think that cooking is a great way to enjoy yourself, it's a great way to relax, and it's a fantastic way to impress people. I all think we should just get out there and give it a good go. So today, I'm going to show you how to make my very own Lout beef pie. Now, the first step to making a pie is of course to make your pastry. I'm going to show you how to make the simplest type of pastry there is, short crust pastry. It only takes a few ingredients and even a monkey could be trained to do it. So here I have 400 grams of plain flour, I've got 200 grams of Trex, which is a type of vegetable fat used for baking. The purists will have you using butter, but this is a lot easier to work with because butter needs to be left out of the fridge to go soft overnight, and this does make very good pastry as well, so no complaints there. I've also got 2 teaspoons of salt, which I'm just going to add in like this. And 6 tablespoons of water. And finally, you don't need this last thing, but I find that it does add a very nice richness and goldness to the pastry. That's 1 egg yolk. Now I'm just going to work this together with my fingers. You will find that this is going to make a lot more pastry than we're going to need today. But the good thing about pastry, especially short crust, is that it can be made well in advance, and you can stick it in the freezer for as long as you like, and then whenever you need it, you've already got your pastry made. Simple. So I'm just going to work this together using my fingers to make sure all the fat is distributed properly through the flour. Oh, I do love this bit, it's all nice and sticky. You could use a food processor, but personally I find this process, getting stuck in and using my hands, rather relaxing and therapeutic. You might even call it cathartic actually, it depends what kind of a week I've had at work. So here we go. Now once this has had a good working through, you should be able to squish it into a nice compact ball, rather like that. Make sure you get all the little bits out of the bowl. That's looking perfect. There we go, I couldn't be happier with that. This baby here now needs to be wrapped up in cling film and chilled in the fridge for a good half an hour or so at least before you start to use it. So this we can now wrap in cling film. There we go. And stick in the fridge. So the pastry will need to chill in the fridge for a good half an hour or so at least before you start to use it. So in the meantime, I'm going to get on with the filling. I do like a good filling. So here I have 4 small, or in fact 2 medium-sized if you like, onions, which I'm first of all going to slice in half. And I'm going to slice those into very fine half rings, like so. So once the onions are all chopped, the next thing we're going to need is a couple of sticks of celery. Now the thing with celery is a lot of people don't like it. Personally I'm not that keen on having it raw myself, but I do like it very cooked up into a nice sauce. It does add a nice rich depthness of flavour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dice this very, very finely. First of all by slicing it lengthways, the whole length of the stalk, like so. Then just chopping it crossways like this gives it a nice fine dice. That way it'll all cook down Add a nice flavour. Without intruding too much and upsetting those of us who don't like it. It's a very classic aromatic combination, onions and celery together in a lot of things. So that's all been nicely diced. Now if, like me, you're a lover of garlic, then you can take 3 cloves. If you're not, then you can add less or none at all. And just chop this up nice and fine too. Okay. And from my windowsill I've taken a little bunch of fresh thyme. Now, easy way to chop herbs. Often you'll find that thyme has these woody stalks that you'll need to strip the leaves off, but this plant here itself that I've taken this from is quite young, so the stems are still quite soft. So I can simply chop those up with the leaves and add the whole lot together. I'm going to chop this finely. Thyme is one of my favourite herbs. It's used a lot in French cooking, which is my favourite, and it does go well with pretty much any meat dish you can think of. Oh, it's fantastic. There we go. So that's looking like probably about 2 teaspoons of chopped fresh thyme there. If you're using dried thyme, then use a good bit less because the flavour is more concentrated. And there we go. In my stock pot here, I have a fairly decent sized knob of butter. I'm just going to melt that over a medium to low heat. Swirl it around the pan a bit just to help it melt. Okay, once that's all melted, in goes our rather classic combination here: onion, celery, garlic with a bit of thyme. That all goes in. I'm going to give that a good stir, just to get everything all nicely coated in the butter. And keep the heat down quite low now, so that it all caramelises nicely as it's cooking. I'm also going to add a couple of bay leaves, like so. Now once that's all nicely coated, I'm just going to cover that, give it one final little stir for luck, make sure everything's all nicely mixed together. I'm going to cover that, I'm going to leave that on a nice low heat just to cook down and sweat a bit and caramelise, to make the flavours nice and soft and rich. Now this is a nice leisurely Sunday dish, so what we're going to do is we're going to leave this covered, give it an occasional stir for a good half an hour to 3/4 of an hour, so that it's all sweated down and so that those onions caramelise and go a nice rich deep golden colour. We don't want them to burn, that's the important thing, otherwise they'll be bitter. So with that little lot cooking nicely, it's now time to sort out my meat. So as you can see here, I've got about 450 to 500 grams, or as the Americans would say, a pound of beef. And I'm going to chuck that in after I've browned it. So in my good big frying pan here, I've got a little splash of oil that I'm just going to heat up. I want to get the heat on this fairly high so that the meat browns nicely. I'm just going to chuck the whole lot into the pan. So this is now starting to take on a nice brown colour. You can hear it starting to sizzle as well as the heat in the pan builds. Oh, that is starting to smell rather nice. So we've given that a good few minutes to brown. As you can hear, the pan is really starting to make quite a noise now. You can see it's got a nice deep brown colour, so I think that's pretty much done. We can take that off the heat now. as you can see, this here too has had a good half an hour or so to sweat down and cook right down to a very nice, fine, rich mixture. So I've taken the lid off, and as you can see, there's very little moisture coming out now. There's very little steam coming off, which means that it's caramelising nicely. And that'll just need a few more minutes now with the lid off to give it a nice, deep flavour. So, into the main pan goes our beef. And it's time to add my favourite ingredient of all, which is a whole can of lager. A good friend of mine, Duncan, used to call this cooking beer, and well, looking at this recipe now, I can understand why. Cheers. So the whole can goes in like that. Oh, that's nice and frothy, look at that. I'm going to give that a good stir. Hear it fizzing away beautifully. Now this will need to be placed on quite a high heat first of all to bring it up to a nice decent boil. Then once it starts to bubble away, as it is here, just turn the heat right down now. I'm going to add to this 2 good quality beef stock cubes first of all. You might call this a cheat, but I find that they do the job very nicely. Just break those up fairly roughly. That's one. And there's the other. There we go. I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of very nice French coarse grain mustard. There we go. Now you either love it or you hate it. I'm also going to add here just a teaspoon of Marmite. Oh, look at that. Not too much, just enough to give it a good bit of extra depth flavour. Now the next ingredient, my advice to you is don't tell anyone that you've put this in, because a lot of people for some reason have this unexplained aversion to them. So a bit of advice I picked up from Nigella herself is don't tell anyone, they won't notice, but you will find that it adds a nice depth of flavour to the dish. And I'm going to add now 6 anchovy fillets. If you want to, you can chop these up, but I don't see the point. You can just add them all whole. By the time this is finished stewing away, they'll just have disappeared and become one with the sauce, so to speak. That's 2. There we are. 3, 4, 5, and 6. Of course, with the Marmite and the anchovies in this dish, the beauty is you'll need to add hardly any salt whatsoever. Just give that a good stir and put the cover back on. Like that. And basically we're going to need to put this on the lowest heat we can now. Now because this is stewing beef, it'll take a good hour at least to stew. I prefer to stew it for a good 2 hours, just to make it nice and tender and soft, otherwise it is tough as old boots. So I'll see you in a little while. I'm off down the shops to get some more beer.